let's see, on supporting all workers from relief funding to unemployment insurance for all workers. We have a great set of executives that are going to be talking about the different proposals that are out there right now in helping California workers get through COVID-19 and what systemic proposals we want to advocate for at a legislative and administrative level so that California workers can feel protected in the event that future pandemics or recessions do come, and we make sure to protect California's immigrant employees. So joining me on my panel, I have Maricela Morales, Executive Director of CAUSE, and Maricela Gutierrez, Executive Director of Siren. We are also hoping, I think we might have Mara on, Mara Ventura from North Bay Jobs and Justice. I want to give everyone a chance to acknowledge our panel, so I'll just be quiet for a second and do a nice applause. Maricela Morales, it's going to be, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to adjust to having a couple people now with the same first names. It never happens with Orville. But Maricela Morales, could you please introduce yourself and the work that you're doing with CAUSE?
Great. These are just beginning introductions.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. Thank you to the CIPC staff that's done an amazing job today. I've been listening in all day long to the virtual Day of Action, and it's just been inspiring and incredibly informational. Thank you. My name is Maricela Morales, and I am co-founder and executive director of the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy, or CAUSE, located in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. We are an intersectional organization doing organizing with youth, young adults, and adults, immigrant adults, on 6 different issue priorities, including immigrant rights. And we are a partner with Future Leaders of America and Mixteco Indígena Community Organizing Project on the 805 Undocu Fund to provide relief aid to undocumented workers. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for my panelists, I hope you guys have my screen popped up to help the interpreters. If I am going like this, that means to slow down a little bit so that they can, convey what you are saying to our audience. And then if I'm getting any questions from the audience, you could either have a raise your hand function, or you could ping me in the chat and I'll relay the questions to our panelists. So thank you. Maricela Gutierrez, can you give us a quick introduction about you and your services at Siren?
Great, thank you, Orville. It is you do have a unique name, so I appreciate you mentioning that, and thank you, Maricela, my tocaya, for being on this panel with me. I'm really excited to be at Immigrant Day. I was pretty sad that it might not happen. Siren has been involved since the beginning, and so it's such a joy to be together in community, to be celebrating immigrants, especially during this time, and just, showing our teeth and our true grit as to how we advocate strongly here in California, and how California is a leader for the nation in as far as immigrant rights, and definitely CIPC has played a big role in that, as well as all the partners that are here with us today. As I mentioned, Siren, as you mentioned, Siren is an immigrant and refugee rights organization. We prioritize low-income immigrants. We provide free legal services, community organizing, intergenerational, multiracial community organizing, advocacy, local, state, and federal advocacy, and civic engagement. Everything from getting the vote out, getting votes registered, getting young people and folks registered to vote, voter forums, and we're really heavily involved with the census right now at this moment, as many of my partners are as well. And we're based out in San Jose, but also have an office in the Central Valley and Fresno.
Thank you so much. And it's like you saw the chat box when you were saying that, because when you were talking about where the services are based out of, someone just had asked where Siren was doing most of its work. So thanks for thinking about me and making the job a little easier. Mara from North Bay Jobs with Justice. Can you please introduce yourself and the work that your organization is doing?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Mara. I'm the Executive Director of North Bay Jobs with Justice. We are a coalition of more than 25 organizations across the North Bay. So we represent Sonoma County, Mendocino, Lake, Napa, and Marin County. Our primary focus is to grassroots organize on issues that we believe impact our low-wage workers the most. And we also provide data and information for our county and other organizations locally to be able to make decisions that prioritize low-wage workers. Part of the data that we collect and part of the work that we do emphasizes that our workers up here are predominantly farm workers. We have currently 78,000 workers who are trying to live in the North Bay off the minimum wage. And so we want to push policies that don't just prioritize them, but also emphasize that they're predominantly women. They're predominantly Latina and Black women and Indigenous women, and that they're predominantly immigrants. And so any work that's happening up here, particularly because we have just in the last few years been crisis after crisis with historic fires and floods and more fires and now this pandemic. So we also have a table where we pulled most of our major environmental organizations called an Alliance for a Just Recovery. And our work is also focused around grassroots organizing on what we believe is a just, sustainable, and equitable recovery. And I'll just end with in 2017, in the wake of the fires, we joined one of our members, the Great Day Labor Center, and another powerful grassroots organization up here, North Bay Organizing Project, to create the Undocu Fund. So I'll leave it with that for now.
I want to thank you for bringing up a point that I hope everyone is understanding more greatly at this level. The economic insecurity for our immigrant communities didn't just start with COVID-19 and this pandemic. We've seen it exacerbated during the fires up and down the state in Santa Barbara, in the North Bay, near San Jose. And we've also seen the economic inequality grow between, low-wage workers and kind of the billionaire tech industry that California has seen. And that's especially predominant in portions of the Bay Area where the cost of living is forcing some of our communities to choose between long transits and the jobs that they've held for so long. How has COVID-19 started to shape the conversations that you all have had with the community over what is the right policy for moving forward and providing some sort of economic security? And I ask this knowing that I think there are very different policies that people are talking about, and there's no one policy that fits all. So I think this will allow each organization to really get into what their community is saying might be best for them. Marcela Gutierrez, would you mind starting off with us?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the question. Definitely, it's such a difficult time for our families as we went into shelter in place. Siren definitely felt the impact of this pandemic. We saw our phone calls triple in number, where we're receiving possibly around 1,000 calls per week. We also have a texting platform where folks can text us and let us know about their needs and what's happening. We usually use that texting platform for rapid response around ICE. But during the situation, it's been really helpful to utilize it to inform the community about resources that are available in the community through our texting platform. But definitely first and foremost, because Siren has an office in the Silicon Valley area, rent, definitely rent moratoriums, the expensive cost of living in a home and paying their rent and knowing what next month looks like for people is definitely a critical need, and really mobilizing on the ground. Many organizations that do housing rights have been mobilizing on the ground to create some type of moratorium, forgiveness program, and also mobilizing, just basic checks to get people to pay their next rent and supporting them around that. And then, obviously seeing the layoffs. There was a recent article in the San Jose Mercury that came out, I believe today, that talked about that the highest rates of people impacted by COVID-19, the zip codes that they showed were predominantly in East San Jose. East San Jose is mainly your immigrant hub. It's where Latino immigrants work and live. And many of them are essential workers. So as you see, they're hitting this high peak because many of them are being exposed as workers, as critical workers. And so it's to be expected that people's lives are being impacted because they're being put on the front lines of this work. We also heard about, now farm workers are being impacted in the Central Valley as essential workers. They've been out on the fields every day. Masks weren't being provided, the right place, proper accessible water for them to wash their hands, or even an opportunity to get education on what's available during COVID-19. They just continued work as usual, being out in the fields, picking the oranges and vitamin C that we need during this time, and all the different fruits and vegetables that we need. As essential workers, they feed us, they feed the world. Without them, we can't exist. And the fact that they're not being prioritized as people that should be protected, receive some type of form of relief, or qualify for anything is just really shameful. And so as much advocacy as we can do to protect farm workers, to protect the essential workers, to protect immigrants is really critical at this time. Everything from the wraparound care, the housing, seeing how we can get them a stimulus, and seeing how we can make it a long-term solution like KLIEITC is definitely the right path in the right direction. And that's why this conference is so important. Immigrant Day is so important because the voices are uplifted of the people who are most needy. They're not here advocating for us in the virtually or in the hallways because they're working. And so we are the voice for them. And it's so critical that we are all here together, continuing to promote that and having legislators that understand the value of immigrants to California and to the great state of California that makes the economy, what it is really important. I'm really proud and honored to be here with the rest of my colleagues.
Thank you. Marcela from Cause, can you talk about what your community is starting to think through and what would be best for the people of the Central Coast?
Yes, what we are wanting to lift up along with partners throughout the state is moving from relief to unemployment insurance for all. This COVID-19 has exacerbated what we've all known. We also were created as a result of wildfires in December of 2017. We've had wildfires every year since then. And we stepped up yet again, as we all continually are having to do, and created the 805 and DocuFund, modeled after the Sonoma one, which was the first. And in the last 2 years, we served 1,800 families, undocumented, working families in Ventura, Santa Barbara counties. And right now, we have a list of 7,200 undocumented workers and their families on our list that are hoping to be able to access some of the relief aid through the 805 and DocuFund. So from 1,800 over a 2-year period to 7,200 in a 2-month period shows us the degree of impact and the degree to which our undocumented workers and their families have always been here. And this is an opportunity to really lift them up as workers who are being denied unemployment insurance, just as they're denied Social Security, just as they're denied, Medi-Cal, so many things. So they're working, they're contributing towards unemployment insurance, and they are locked out. And charity is only going to take us so far. The $75 million that the governor announced, that's going to serve in our community about 2,000 families out of 120,000 undocumented people in our region. So it is absolutely a drop in the bucket, not just in our community, but throughout the state, where there's 2.5 million undocumented people in California. And so we're using this time to organize and to push the governor and our state legislators to finally open the doors to unemployment. The doors that have been locked unjustly to undocumented workers. It's time now. So that's the push, is to go from relief to unemployment insurance, because charity is not going to fix it, and it isn't the responsibility of private foundations or individual donors that are digging into their own pockets, even if they've lost time off work. Charity is important. It is a first step, but we need a real fix, and that's unemployment insurance for undocumented workers.
Thank you. Mara, what is the North Bay Jobs with Justice trying to think of as something that the community wants to uplift?
Yeah, well, I just want to echo, I mean, I think what both the other panelists have said already is spot on. I mean, a majority of our essential workers here are farm workers. So for us, we've also been trying to change the narrative to remind folks that even in the most dire, extreme economic situations where everything has to shut down, our farm workers need to keep going because you need to have food on your plate. And so fighting for our farm workers shouldn't just happen right now in the middle of a pandemic, but should be always. And it should be really clear that they are the most essential and they deserve more rights. And so that's been a big part. We know that 7 out of 10 of our farm workers in the North Bay receive no health insurance from their employers, no type of medical coverage at all. So really pushing on mandates from our county to mandate that growers and farmers provide health insurance, particularly right now at a time where no worker should have to choose between a paycheck or going home sick. So with that, we've also been trying to enforce paid sick time. One thing that was really helpful for our essential workers that came out of Congress's CARES Act mandated 10 days paid sick leave for workers, at least for employers with 500 employees or less. So the bigger problem is that it cuts out these large corporations, and we've been trying to fill the gap with a county-wide ordinance and a city-wide ordinance that'll hopefully get voted on here in the next couple of weeks as we start to reopen. But so part of it is the enforcement and the incredible lack of funding and enforcement that this state has put forward to ensuring that workers can the lack of funding that this state provides for enforcement so that workers can uphold the rights that they already have, including paid sick leave. So that has been a huge push. I really appreciate what Marisela said about it not being on our communities to have to fund the relief and support for undocumented workers. So we had the same experience in the first 2 weeks of shutdowns. We hit 4,000 people on our wait list. So we closed our wait list because we didn't know how we were going to fund that load of people, and we still have 3,000 left on our wait list now. So we are happy to see some first steps from the state government, but 125 million is a drop in the bucket. So we need a larger effort here on behalf of our state to include our undocumented and our immigrant community members in a whole host of services, including things like Medicaid. And then the last two things, I'll just say language justice, particularly, of course, for Spanish, but particularly for Indigenous languages, is incredibly lacking from our counties up here in terms of getting emergency information and alert information to our immigrant community. And so our local immigrant task force has been really trying to push to ensure that Indigenous folks are compensated to be able to interpret and translate, and that information is prioritized by our counties up here to provide to families and workers. And the last thing is we, even in the midst of a pandemic and shelter in place, our sheriff has continued in Sonoma County to collaborate with ICE to turn people being released over. And there was a huge push by many of our organizations to release prisoners that were high risk or did not need to be in our jails in the first place. And to see some of them never see the light of day because the ICE van was waiting for them when they walked out is totally unacceptable. And so that's a big push on our platform as well.
And that platform is similar to what CIPC and our community partners shared today with legislators and staff. So kudos to everyone that took part in legislative visits. I think we had over 100 visits. And so that message was delivered loud and clear. A follow-up question I want to ask to our panel is what's the average amount that you're able to provide to families right now through your various funds and what you have set up in the community? I know the numbers are staggering as to how many people are trying to access those, but what are you able to give right now?
Yeah, that's, it's a decision that has to be made at the local level in terms of those who are administering any relief aids. And I would say there's no right or wrong answer. It's a tough decision because the more you give to one family, then that means less families you're going to be able to serve. So it often feels like a no-win proposition. But we decided at the 805 and DocuFund as a collaborative that we were going to give families $1,200 for as a one-time relief aid, and we base that on the fact that they're not eligible for the $1,200 per adult that the federal stimulus is giving, and it was an amount that that we felt also lifted up the worth and dignity of undocumented people by having it be the same as the per adult federal stimulus amount, and that's what we're doing at our end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're in the same position. When we first opened our fund, we thought we'd be able to give more, but when our list escalated to 1,000, 2,000 very quickly in the first few days, we also had the thought about how many people can we get a check to, with the hope that funding that's being collected by GSER and by the state would hopefully get dispersed over time. And so we're doing $1,000 per family. Although one thing we're doing that I think is great is we're trying to be thoughtful. If anybody on our list or possibly who didn't know about UndocuFund does either contract COVID-19 or they're trying to isolate with someone who has COVID-19 and they're unable to work, then we'll give $1,000 to that individual to try to incentivize them to not go to work. And I really encourage anyone that's raising funds or looking for a fund that came to us from actual doctors on the ground that were noticing that some of their COVID positive patients were undocumented workers that needed to still work or were still able to go to work either as day laborers or essential workers, farm workers. So I really appreciate that. And we really encourage anyone that's giving out funds to try to connect with healthcare workers who are already, identifying possible undocumented or immigrant workers that are trying to stay safe and trying to self-isolate, but need a paycheck. So
yeah, I think that brings up a point that I've heard several times in the last week, that the community that we advocate for oftentimes fits many people into one household that don't have the ability to quarantine, whether it's sharing of bathrooms or multiple families in one apartment dwelling. There isn't that opportunity to space out a little bit more. Going to something that we talked about, which was narrative. How do we as advocates and community help to educate those in power about the need for undocumented assistance, especially given the times that we live in, where the concern now is how do we pay for it? And Maricela Gutierrez, I'll start with you. Is there something that Siren's been able to do to get legislators educated and to get them involved in the advocacy?
Yes, most definitely. We've actually been meeting with members of Congress, local members of Congress, you know, on the federal level to really start thinking about how they start including more immigrants and undocumented families in this next round of legislation that's coming. And, you know, many of the representatives we spoke to are definitely aligned with the work that Siren is doing, and that many organizations across the country are doing, and here in California. All our meetings always include directly impacted people. We always feel that that's the most important way, is to share that the people who are directly impacted are the protagonists in the story, and that they themselves are sharing their own story. So having them join us at our meetings is really critical for us, so that we're not speaking on their behalf, right? So I think that's made a great impact for them to hear directly from people how they've been losing their jobs, how they can't pay their rent, what they're seeing in their community, and make direct asks to the legislators, to the representatives, on what they'd like to see. And just quickly on the other question you had, Siren did start giving funding. We made our target really focused. Since we work with a lot of clients through legal services, we had a big population to already start with that were undocumented. So we gave $500 each to each family, and that's what we're currently doing, hoping that when the state funding comes in, we can give that family another $500. The state funding hasn't fully come in yet. We're still getting more details on how that's going to play out and who's going to receive it. We're hoping Siren is a recipient, as well as many of the organizations that are trusted partners that the community trusts, that knows how to work with the undocumented and immigrant community. But yeah, you know, in terms of that, that's just what we've been doing, is meeting directly with the legislators and also local county supervisors too, to see what they can do locally on the ground to open up more funds for families.
Marcela or Mara, do you want to talk about the advocacy efforts or education efforts you guys are all working on?
Yes, and it has changed. It's still in part being developed, but it has changed just since last Thursday, or when the budget projections were shared. And so what we're wanting to frame around is this notion of care for us, as in we have to invest in Californians, and that includes undocumented workers now more than ever, that if the governor wants a recovery of the type that he's spoken about, that includes racial equity, then an austerity informed or leading message, you know, is not the one that will meet, you know, the challenge before us. So we're trying to figure that out now. What is a message that counters what corporations, the status quo, are already going to use, you know, that we just all have to tighten our belt, you know, 5, 6, 7, a dozen more, you know, times because there's no money. No, there is money. We need to be talking about a wealth tax at this time. The majority of us, right, the 99% are struggling, but the 1% in California, which there are a lot, are fine. And so it cannot be all about austerity. It has to be about a recovery that includes protecting the most vulnerable.
And then Mara, is there anything you want to add to the conversation here?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that hits it on the head perfectly. You know, it's, as a workers' rights organization, I think it's important to us to be thoughtful about balancing our language around the importance that workers have the right to have dignity and respect and deserve to be able to not just survive, but thrive and recover from anything that hits our way, as anybody in our community, to balance that with also balancing messaging that reminds our legislators, whether local, statewide, or federal, that their value is not measured by the labor that they provide. And I think that's such a strong message that we hear all the time around, we have to support immigrant workers because they fill the jobs other people don't want to fill, or they provide, this much. And I think it's been a tough balance, as I said. Important to see, even in a shutdown, that they are essential workers. They are the ones that are keeping things going. But at the same time, like, regardless of whether they are putting food on our table, or they're home taking care of their family members, or whatever it is that they do or don't do, even if they are unemployed, even whether they're going to school or not, their livelihood and their value is still just as important as anyone else, and more so than the CEO Jeff Bezos of Amazon, who are profiteering off these pandemics. So I think really trying to highlight disaster capitalism, push back on organizations like the National Restaurant Association, who restaurants employ huge amounts of immigrant workers in our communities, and have been lobbying for governors like Governor Newsom across the country to stop the minimum wage. They've been active even up in Santa Rosa, California, trying to push back on the minimum wage that's supposed to go to 15 on July 1st. So really sort of holding and calling out some of these organizations and corporations accountable for advocacy that ultimately harms our communities.
Yeah, thank you. And I really want to hit on that topic of essential. But first, there's a question that has been put in the chat asking how your organizations vet some of the applications that come in for assistance during this time.
Yeah, we've all had to figure out how to do direct services, in essence, in COVID time. And so the process that we're using is, in the past, we would have, in-person application clinics on Saturdays and Sundays, with, 100 people more, right, at a time. Well, we can't do that. It's still very volunteer driven. They're trained. And so they're using WhatsApp video to do quote unquote in-person via video application assistance. And the plus side is that through video, you can show your photo ID. We ask for a photo ID, not because we're trying to, check for anything else than, are they who they say they are? Their name and their photo. In terms of there being a local resident, these are geographically based relief funds. They can show up at the screen, a utility bill or, something with their address and name on it. And in terms of, their work situation, they can show a pay stub up to the screen. And so that is how we're, going through the process at this time.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment? I'm sure it might be similar, or there might be some things that are unique to your guys' locations.
That's pretty similar for us. The only thing I would add is just that we did at least put partially our applications online on a Google survey, not all the information we need to collect, but just so that we can at least start identifying who's on our wait list, whereas in years past, our wait list was just a Excel list that our coordinator kept of like a name and contact info. But for the sake of wanting to understand who are the 4,000 folks, what are their family sizes and things like that, we do that, and then we take referrals from our local healthcare workers doing isolation care and reaching out to folks in isolation, which is how we identify if there's any undocumented folks under isolation orders.
Mm-hmm. Marcela Gutierrez, is there anything that Siren has for its vetting process?
Yeah, it's very similar to my colleagues. In addition, we also connect them to a case manager for wraparound care. It's something that we've added just to make sure that they know where to go for food, childcare, the many services that folks are needing right now. So it's not just stuck with Siren, that they know other places that are connected to other organizations that are doing great work on the ground. And in addition, we offer a free legal consultation in connection to the funding. Because if they are undocumented, we want to make sure that we assess them for all forms of legal relief to see if they qualify or their family. And also provide for protection for them at this time too as undocumented individuals. Because we know that this virus does not discriminate, and that many families are impacted. And it's no lie that when the data started coming out that mainly people of color were being impacted, that's when it started becoming less of a virus, right? And the government started opening the economy and having people work. So the more that we can also educate our community about how their lives are being placed at risk during this time and who they can come out to for advocacy is also part of the work.
Thank you. I want to touch on the word essential, and it's been used very broadly in media to really share the narrative of who are the workers that are still going out and doing the jobs and what those jobs entail to provide for the people that can and are staying at home. Is this one of those inflection moments that the immigrant community has to get more support? We see polling that shows the farm worker support is at all-time highs to provide them with benefits. But how do we take that community support and translate it into action? And it's harder on the federal level given the people in power at the highest levels. But how do we advocate, and how can us as community members advocate and help?
It is harder federally to some degree. I also think there's an important opportunity with the elections. I know this is creating voter suppression issues that we also now have to tackle as on the ground community organizations. But in general, I think being able to hold folks that want to be allies, are saying they're allies, in these surveys or donating to UndocuFund, I think we have to be able to translate that into tangible actions that allies can take to vote politicians who are not going to be supportive and who have historically not been supportive out of office, and to put real champions in, to use them to provide resources to ensure that we can support the right people to run for office. I mean, we do very little political work in North Bay Jobs with Justice. We mostly do issues, but I will just say, to your point around it being more challenging on the federal level, there is an important opportunity. It's not just our president we're voting for, but also I think being able to move those folks to action as much as possible, because there are a lot of allies that they're still working, they're making full salaries, this is not a time that anyone with a salary should be saving money. This is a time that they should be ensuring that everyone in the community is able to live and be able to survive this pandemic. And so encouraging folks to donate where they can, holding not just our statewide government accountable, but our counties have immense power as well, and funding. They shouldn't be remodeling offices or providing bonuses to top level executives. We have to make sure that our county funding and our tax dollars, which includes many immigrant families, are also being reappropriated to the programs, as you said, that are not just ensuring that people who are in crisis now are supported, but our immigrant families who are in crisis before these things hit. So just to say, I think we have to be creative in thinking about how we are asking allies to move resources to support any kind of movement work that's being led by immigrants.
Mm-hmm. Do any of our other panelists want to chime in on that?
Yes, I mean, I think it's so important to use these moments to turn them into movements, right? And exactly like Mara's saying, it's like, how do we elevate this work to the highest, and how do we push the envelope during this time? It's such an opportunity as we call out for everyone to be included, that we also think about what are those demands that we've been asking as immigrant rights advocates. So abolishing ICE, freeing them all. How do we continue pushing that policy and advocacy to the highest level at this time? Is when we can start creating true change for our communities, right? We started seeing people being released from Mesa Verde and other detention centers across the country because we took this moment to create a movement, right? And how do we continue to expand that movement to the highest level where we know that our values and humanity are at the forefront, and that means all of us. So if one of us is hurt, one of us is sick, it impacts all of us. You know, there was just in the news today that a 6-month-old baby was now contracted with the coronavirus. How horrific and sad that is, you know, that small children are now being targeted by this horrific virus. And so that means that none of us are immune to this situation. So the most that we can do to be the strongest advocates for our communities, and those are us that are on the ground, but elevating others that are wanting to do something at this time. Like, even though people are giving their $10, $100, $1,000, those are all people that we can mobilize to be on the front lines of the policy advocacy work that we're doing. And the legislation, right, that is being talked about today in this platform at Immigrant Day is so critical too, and in getting more people informed of how that impacts the immigrant community, because I know that some people are not fully aware, but there's a lot of people sitting at home that have time on their hands to really do more with their time.
Mm-hmm. And Maricela from Cause?
Would echo what Mara and Maricela said.
Thank you. And before we go, one last opportunity. Can you please all give information if there are anyone in attendance that wants to donate to your organizations, and maybe send a link via the Zoom chat? So I will start with Mara. Can you give a information and put it in the chat for what North Bay Jobs with Justice is doing?
Yes, you can check us out at www.northbayjobswithjustice.org. And then if you want to learn more about some of the local policies that we're pushing, you can also go to SOCO, S-O-C-O, SOCOUnitedincrisis.org. And that's a list of some of the policies that we're trying to push locally. And there's information on our website about our Alliance for Just Recovery and UndocuFund as well. Thank you, Orville.
Thank you. Maricela from Cause?
Yeah, people can go to 805immigrant.org. That's actually the webpage for our Central Coast Immigrant Rights Coalition. That is a part of the CIPC. And so they could link to us through that, but that will have other information. And also want to lift up Legal Aid at Work. They're out of the Bay Area, and their website is a list of 43 funds that are available specifically or including undocumented people throughout the state. I will say that 60% of those are already closed because they only had so much money. Again, the need to go from relief to unemployment insurance and other systemic reforms. And if you want to find more information in your local area, you could find it there.
Thank you. And once again, if you guys can put any of the websites in the chat, I know people are asking for it. And then Maricela from Siren.
Yes, definitely. You can, check out our social media pages. Obviously, we're highly promoting these funds and other funds. We also created a resource guide that includes most of the funds that we are aware of around the state, and resources and links to places where people can donate. So I will add that to the chat box. But www.sirenbayarea.org. Thank you.
All right, I want to thank our panelists and thank our attendees. Thank you all for the work that you have done, continue to do, and I know you will continue to do in the future. It is much appreciated. We appreciate all of your time and efforts and all that you do for our members.